Under the vast Arizona sky of 1876, Lone Wolf stood before the tribal council, his eyes fixed on the small boy playing near the settler's wagon. "That boy will call me father soon," he declared, voice steady as stone. The elders exchanged glances, some pitying, others suspicious, for what claim could an Apache warrior have on a white settler's child? When Lone Wolf vanished that night, his words became a whispered tale, soon forgotten as the seasons changed. 17 years passed before he returned, the now-grown boy at his side. What ancient promise had bound these two souls across time and blood? What secret would unravel the very foundation of the tribe's beliefs? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Under the blistering Arizona sun of 1876, the White Mountain Apache Reservation stirred with unease. The council members sat in a semicircle, their weathered faces illuminated by the dancing flames of the sacred fire. Among them, Lone Wolf stood apart, not just physically, but in spirit. His buckskins were adorned with fewer decorations than the others, his face bearing the marks of battles both seen and unseen. At the center of the gathering lay the talking stick, polished smooth by generations of hands that had wielded it before speaking their truth. This wasn't merely wood. It was the tribe's history, authority, and voice, carved with symbols that told the story of their people. "The settlers push closer to our hunting grounds," Running Elk said, his voice carrying the weight of concern. "The Harris family has built their home in the shadow of Grandfather Mountain." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. This wasn't news, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that silent knowledge did not. "They seem peaceful enough," offered Gray Cloud, an elder whose judgment was respected even when not agreed with. "The man builds fences, not forts." Lone Wolf's eyes drifted beyond the council circle to where a small boy played near a settler's wagon. At the trading post, the child, no more than 5 summers, was pale as the moon with hair, the color of sun-bleached grass. Yet something in his movements, in the tilt of his head as he studied a beetle crawling across his palm, seemed strangely familiar. "The woman, she watches our ways," Singing Bird said softly. As the tribe's healer, she noticed things others missed, not with fear, but with knowing eyes. Lone Wolf finally reached for the talking stick, a rare occurrence that instantly commanded attention. He held it loosely as if its weight troubled him. "I have walked near their homestead," he said, his voice low but clear as still water. "The woman, Elizabeth, she knows herbs that only our people use. The man is proud, but fair in trade." What he didn't say hung in the air between his words. That he had once found Elizabeth Harris kneeling beside a stream, singing a melody that only Apache mothers sang to their children. That when their eyes met, hers had widened not with fear, but with recognition. "And the boy?" asked Running Elk, breaking protocol by speaking without the stick. Lone Wolf turned his gaze back to the child, who was now looking in their direction with undisguised curiosity. "That boy will call me father soon," he said, the words falling into the silence, like stones into a deep pool. The elders exchanged glances, some pitying, others suspicious. Gray Cloud's hand moved subtly in the sign to ward off madness. "What claim does an Apache warrior have on a white settler's child?" demanded Black Hawk, the youngest of the council members and the most distrustful of white ways. Lone Wolf merely returned the talking stick to its place of honor at the center of the circle. "What is written in blood cannot be washed away," he said, though no one had asked him to explain. Later, as the council dispersed, Singing Bird approached him at the edge of the camp. Her fingers brushed his arm with the familiarity of old friendship, or perhaps something more. "The path you walk is dangerous," she whispered. "For you, for the boy, for all of us." Lone Wolf's eyes remained fixed on the distant homestead, where the Harris family had retired for the evening, a thin spiral of smoke rising from their chimney. "Some dangers must be faced," he replied. "Some truths cannot stay buried." When Singing Bird returned to her dwelling at dawn the next morning, she found a small bundle outside her door. Lone Wolf's medicine pouch and his prized hunting knife. She knew, without being told, that he was gone, and she understood, with the wisdom born of years watching him carry his burden, that he would return only when the time was right. By midday, whispers spread through the tribe like wildfire. Lone Wolf had vanished, and with him, the truth behind his strange claim on the white boy, with eyes that, if one looked closely enough, held the same fierce intensity as the missing warriors. James Harris wiped sweat from his brow as he hammered the final post of the new fence line. Behind him, their modest cabin stood, as testament to 6 months of back-breaking work. It wasn't much. 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, but it was more than they'd had back east. "James," Elizabeth called from the doorway, her voice carrying a tension that made him turn. She stood with their daughter Sarah cradled in one arm, her free hand gripping the doorframe. "Thomas is gone again." James sighed, setting down his hammer. This was the 3rd time this week their 5-year-old son had wandered off. He scanned the rolling landscape, squinting against the harsh sunlight. "I'll find him," he said, reaching for his hat. Inside the cabin, on the small table that served as both dining area and Elizabeth's work surface, sat the worn leather journal that never left her possession. Its pages were filled with careful drawings of plants, recipes for tinctures, and notes in a flowing script. Some pages were marked with symbols unfamiliar to James, symbols he'd noticed matched those used by the local Apache. Elizabeth ran her fingers over the journal's cover, a habit when she was anxious. "He's drawn to them," she whispered, more to herself than to James. "It's in his blood." James pretended not to hear. Some truths were better left unspoken. He found Thomas at the trading post, sitting cross-legged before an older Apache man who was showing him how to weave a simple basket. The boy's face was alight with concentration, small fingers mimicking the elder's movements. "Thomas," James called sharply. "Come here." Now, the boy looked up, disappointment crossing his features before he obediently rose. The Apache man nodded respectfully to James, who returned the gesture stiffly. "What have I told you about wandering off?" James asked as they walked back toward the homestead. Thomas kicked at the dusty ground. "I wasn't far, and Grey Cloud was teaching me to make a basket." "It's not safe," James insisted, though they both knew the real danger wasn't from the tribe, who had been nothing but cautious neighbors. "Why does Mother know their song?" Thomas asked suddenly, the question catching James off guard. "What songs?" "The ones she sings to Sarah when she thinks no one is listening." James swallowed hard. "Your mother learned many things in her travels. Before she met you?" "Yes," James said carefully. "Before we were married." That night, after the children were asleep, James confronted Elizabeth as she wrote in her journal by candlelight. "Thomas asked about your songs today," he said quietly. Elizabeth's hand stilled. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. But he's asking questions, Lizzie. And that Apache Lone Wolf. He watches the boy whenever we're near the trading post." Elizabeth closed the journal slowly. "He knows. How could he possibly know? These people have ways of seeing truth," she replied, her voice distant. "I lived among them for nearly a year, James. You knew this when you married me." "I knew you were captured and later rescued," he corrected. "You never spoke of what happened during that time." Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. "Would you have married me if I had?" The question hung between them unanswered. James reached for the small wooden cross that hung on the wall, the only decoration in their sparse home. He ran his fingers over the intricate carvings that adorned its surface. "This was my father's," he said, "a symbol of forgiveness, of redemption." He placed it gently on the table beside her journal. "Whatever happened before, you're my wife now. Thomas is my son." Elizabeth covered his hand with hers. "Thank you," she whispered, but her eyes held a sadness that made James wonder what truths still lay buried. The next day, News reached them that the Apache warrior called Lone Wolf had disappeared. Elizabeth dropped the plate she was washing when James told her. "Did they say where he went?" she asked, kneeling to collect the broken pieces. "No," James replied, watching her carefully. "Does it matter?" Elizabeth shook her head, but that night James caught her standing at the window, staring out at the mountains with Thomas asleep in her arms, her fingers tracing patterns on the boy's back that matched the strange symbols in her journal. Dawn broke over the Apache settlement with an eerie stillness. Running Elk stood outside Lone Wolf's empty dwelling, studying the ground. The tracks told their own story. One set of footprints, one horse heading west toward the mountains. No signs of struggle, no haste. A deliberate departure. "He took very little," said Singing Bird, emerging from the dwelling with a small wooden box in her hands. "His rifle, his knife, some provisions." Running Elk nodded. "And his medicine bundle on," she confirmed, opening the box to reveal a single eagle feather resting on a bed of dried sage. "But he left this." The eagle feather was distinctive, its tip dipped in red ochre, a mark Lone Wolf used to identify his arrows in communal hunts. It was both a signature and a promise. "I will return." "Did he speak to you before leaving?" Running Elk asked, noting how carefully she handled the feather. Singing Bird's eyes remained on the box. "He said the time wasn't right, that 17 summers must pass before the circle closes. And the white boy? He didn't speak of him. A lie, but a necessary one. Some truths were for Lone Wolf alone to reveal." At the tribal council that morning, opinions divided sharply. Some saw Lone Wolf's disappearance as abandonment, others as a spiritual journey. Gray Cloud, eldest among them, spoke of an ancient prophecy. When blood returns to blood, old wounds heal and new strength rises. Black Hawk scoffed. He spoke madness about the settler's child and then fled like a coward. Lone Wolf has never been a coward. Running Elk countered. If he left, he had reason. The debate continued as news traveled to the trading post and eventually to the Harris homestead. Elizabeth received the information with a carefully composed face, but James noticed how her hands trembled as she kneaded bread dough with unusual force. "Good riddance," he muttered. "One less savage watching our boy." Elizabeth's knuckles whitened in the dough. "They're not savages, James. They have traditions older than our Bible." "Speaking of which," James said, pulling their family Bible from the shelf, "I found something strange yesterday." He opened to the first pages where family births and deaths were recorded, pointing to a small symbol drawn in the margin beside Thomas's birth entry. "Did you put this here?" Elizabeth barely glanced at it. "It's nothing, just a mark to note his birth was difficult." But James had seen similar marks at the trading post on Apache goods. The same symbols appeared in Elizabeth's journal. That night, Thomas woke screaming from a nightmare. Elizabeth rushed to his side, cradling him as he sobbed about the man with the eagle. "He was riding away, Mother," Thomas whimpered. "He looked back at me but kept riding away." Elizabeth froze, her eyes meeting James's over their son's head. "It was just a dream," she soothed, but her voice carried a hollow note. Later, unable to sleep, James stepped outside. The moon cast long shadows across their land, and in that half-light, he noticed something at the edge of their property. Walking closer, he found a small arrangement of stones forming the same symbol he'd seen in the Bible. When he returned inside, he found Elizabeth standing by Thomas's bed, watching their son sleep. The moonlight streaming through the window revealed tears on her cheeks. "How long?" James asked quietly. "How long what? How long were you with him before I found you with the rescue party?" Elizabeth's silence was answer enough. "Is Thomas?" James couldn't finish the question. "He's your son," Elizabeth said firmly. "You claimed him as yours before God and man." "That's not what I asked." Elizabeth turned to face him fully. "Would it change how you feel about him if you knew the truth?" James looked at the sleeping boy, fair-haired like Elizabeth, but with eyes that sometimes held a wildness, a depth that reminded him of no one in his own family. "No," he said finally. but it might change how I feel about you." Elizabeth touched her husband's face gently. "Then let the past remain past, James. Lone Wolf is gone. Whatever claim he thought he had on Thomas went with him." But as autumn turned to winter, Thomas continued to dream of the man with the eagle feather, riding through desert landscapes, always looking back as if waiting for something or someone to follow. 7 summers passed, each one etching new lines on James Harris's face, while deepening the furrows of silence between him and Elizabeth. Their homestead had grown, a larger cabin, a proper barn, fields of corn and wheat where once only wild grass had grown. Progress measured in timber and tilled soil. Thomas, now 12, had shot up like a sapling reaching for light. He moved with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with his years, more comfortable tracking game in the hills than sitting in the schoolhouse 20 miles away where James insisted he attend 1 week each month. He needs education, James would argue, book learning, not just how to set snares and read weather. Elizabeth would nod, her once vibrant eyes now dulled with a persistent weariness. "Of course," she would say, though they both knew Thomas learned more from the land than from any book. On the dresser in James and Elizabeth's bedroom sat a small wooden music box, a gift James had given her for their 10th anniversary. Inside, hidden beneath the clockwork mechanism, Elizabeth kept a small pouch of dried herbs that filled the room with a strange, spicy scent when the box was opened. The melody it played was not the European tune it had been built for. James had paid a craftsman to modify it to play a simpler, haunting refrain that Elizabeth had hummed throughout their marriage. Neither of them acknowledged that it was an Apache lullaby. On the day everything changed, Elizabeth had been bedridden for nearly a week. A persistent cough had settled in her chest, and despite her knowledge of healing herbs, nothing seemed to help. "Send Thomas for the doctor," she wheezed to James, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "That's a 2-day ride," James protested. "Sarah needs looking after, and the crops." "James." The single word carried such command that he fell silent. "There's something you need to know about Thomas." A cold dread settled in James's stomach. "Lizzie, you're feverish. Rest now and—" "No." She struggled to sit up, her face flushed with urgency rather than fever. "I should have told you years ago. I was wrong to keep it from you from him." From the doorway came 7-year-old Sarah's voice. "Père, Mère needs her medicine." James turned to see his daughter clutching the small glass bottle of tonic the tribal healer, Singing Bird, had sent over when news of Elizabeth's illness reached the settlement. "Give us a moment, Sarah," James said gently. "But Mère said to take it 3 times before sundown, and the sun's almost. Go check on your brother." James interrupted, his voice sharper than intended. After Sarah scurried away, Elizabeth grasped James's sleeve. "The music box," she whispered. "Open it." James complied, the familiar melody filling the room. Elizabeth reached in with trembling fingers, pushing aside the hidden pouch to reveal something James had never seen. A small, yellowed piece of paper folded into a tight square. "Read it," she urged. After I'm gone, you'll need to know." "Don't talk like that," James said, but he took the paper and carefully unfolded it. Before he could read the faded writing, Thomas appeared in the doorway, breathless. "Riders coming," he announced. "Army patrol, looks like." James stuffed the paper into his pocket. "Stay with your mother," he instructed, heading outside to meet the unexpected visitors. Captain William Reeves dismounted, with the practiced ease of a man who lived more in the saddle than out of it. "Harris," he greeted curtly, "we're tracking a band of renegades. Apache. Stole some horses from the fort and killed 2 men. Haven't seen any trouble," James replied, eyeing the 6 dusty soldiers who remained mounted. "The local tribe's been peaceful for years." "Not talking about the locals," Reeves clarified. "These are from further south. Word is they're looking to incite the peaceful bands to join them." His eyes narrowed. "Heard a rumor that got my attention, though. About a warrior who used to scout for the army years back. Called himself Lone Wolf." James stiffened. "What about him?" "Some say he's been spotted again, after all these years. You hear anything like that?" "No," James said too quickly. He disappeared years ago, nobody knows where. Reeves studied him a moment longer than comfortable. Well, if you see anything suspicious, you let us know. These hostiles are dangerous. He tipped his hat. Ma'am, he added, looking past James. James turned to see Elizabeth standing in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, despite the summer heat, her face pale but determined. Thomas stood beside her, one hand supporting her elbow, his expression unreadable as he stared at the soldiers. That night, Elizabeth's fever spiked dangerously. In her delirium, she spoke in a language James recognized as Apache, her hands making strange gestures in the air above her. Thomas sat by her bed all night, answering her foreign words as if he understood them perfectly. By morning, Elizabeth Harris was dead, the unread confession still folded in James's pocket, and the music box playing its haunting melody beside her, still form. The earth had barely settled on Elizabeth's grave when James Harris began to change. The bottle became his comfort, his confidant, his escape. He would sit on the porch each evening, a glass of whiskey in hand, watching Thomas complete the chores that once would have been James's responsibility. "You don't do it right," he would mutter, though Thomas handled the livestock with a natural ease James had never possessed. "Your mother spoiled you." Thomas would say nothing, absorbing the words like the dry earth absorbed rare rain. At 12, he'd grown into a solemn young man, shouldering both his grief and his father's, without complaint. Only Sarah saw how he would sometimes stop at the edge of the property, staring toward the mountains with a yearning he couldn't explain. 3 months after Elizabeth's passing, Sarah discovered a peculiar item while helping Thomas clean the barn. Tucked inside a hollow space in one of the support beams was a small deerskin pouch, the leather soft with age and handling. When she shook it, something inside made a deep, resonant sound. "What is it?" she asked, holding it out to Thomas. He took it carefully, loosening the drawstring to reveal a bone flute, delicately carved with symbols similar to those in their mother's journal. Thomas's fingers traced the markings with unexpected familiarity. "It's a courting flute," he said, the knowledge coming to him from somewhere he couldn't identify. "Apache men play them for the women they wish to marry." Sarah's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" Thomas shook his head, confusion crossing his features. "I don't know. I just know." Later that night, when Sarah should have been sleeping, she crept to the window and saw Thomas standing in the moonlight, the flute raised to his lips. The melody that emerged was haunting, the same one their mother's music box played, but with variations that somehow made it more raw, more primal. In the Apache settlement, elderly Singing Bird sat bolt upright in her bed, the familiar notes carrying on the night wind. It had been years since she'd heard that particular melody. Lone Wolf's courting song, the one he had played for Elizabeth in those secret months before she left with James Harris. The next morning, while Thomas was in the fields, James discovered the flute hidden among Thomas's few possessions. His face contorted with rage, he stumbled to the fireplace and thrust the instrument into the flames. Sarah, witnessing this from the doorway, cried out in protest. "It was Mother's," she wailed. James turned on her, his eyes red-rimmed from drink and sleeplessness. "Your mother is dead," he spat, "and anything of hers that reeks of those savages burns." When Thomas returned and found the charred remnants, he said nothing. But that night, James awoke to find his son sitting outside, whittling a new flute from a piece of river cane, his hands moving with practiced precision despite never having made one before. "Where did you learn to do that?" James demanded, swaying slightly in the doorway. Thomas looked up, his eyes reflecting the starlight in a way that made James's breath catch. They were Elizabeth's eyes, but in that moment they held someone else's gaze. "I don't know," Thomas answered honestly. "My hands just remember." James knocked the half-finished flute from Thomas's grasp. "No more of this nonsense," he growled. "You're my son. You'll act like it." The words hung between them, a challenge neither was ready to address. Thomas simply picked up the flute and continued his work, his defiance quiet but unmistakable. The following day, Sarah fell ill with a fever. James, too deep in his bottle to be of use, watched helplessly as Thomas gathered herbs from the patches Elizabeth had cultivated. The boy worked with confident movements, brewing a tea that smelled of sage and juniper. "How do you know what to do?" James asked, momentarily sobered by concern for his daughter. "Mother taught me," Thomas replied, though both knew Elizabeth had never explicitly shared her healing knowledge with him. As Sarah's fever broke under Thomas's care, word reached them that an elderly Apache woman had collapsed at the trading post, asking for Elizabeth Harris with her last conscious breath. Singing Bird had been found clutching a small wooden object, a carving of an eagle in flight. The trader delivered it to the Harris homestead, explaining that the old woman had insisted it be given to the boy who carries two bloods. Thomas took the carving, something stirring in his memory. That night he dreamed of a man riding through desert landscapes, an eagle feather in his hair, always looking back. But this time the man stopped, turned his horse, and began riding toward him. 5 more years passed like shadows across the sun. The Harris homestead prospered, despite James's deepening relationship with the bottle. Thomas, now 17, had grown tall and strong, his shoulders broad from labor, his eyes holding a wisdom beyond his years. He managed the farm almost entirely on his own, while Sarah, 12 and bright as morning, kept the house with an efficiency that would have made Elizabeth proud. In the small cemetery plot on the edge of their property, Elizabeth's grave stood well tended, always adorned with fresh wildflowers that Thomas gathered on his dawn rides. Beside it lay a smaller marker for Singing Bird, who had asked in her final moments to be buried near the white woman who knew our ways. James had protested, but Thomas had quietly insisted, and for once, his father had relented. The trading post had grown into a proper settlement, with a general store, small church, and even a sheriff's office. The Apache tribe had been relegated to a more distant reservation, though some, like Running Elk, now a tribal elder, still made monthly journeys to trade and maintain connections with the settlers they had once called neighbors. On a spring morning that promised summer's heat, Thomas discovered something that changed everything. While repairing a loose floorboard in Elizabeth's old herb room, his knife struck something solid. Prying up the board revealed a small space beneath, and nestled within it, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a tarnished silver pendant. The pendant was circular, engraved with intertwining symbols, half Apache designs, half what appeared to be Christian motif. Thomas turned it over to find an inscription on the back, 2 2s, 1 C, E and L. His hands trembled as he fastened the chain around his neck, the pendant settling against his chest as if it had always belonged there. Something about it felt like a missing piece slotting into place, a key turning in a lock long rusted shut. When Running Elk visited that afternoon to trade for grain, his eyes fixed immediately on the pendant visible at Thomas's collar. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his weathered hand reaching out before stopping just short of touching it. "It was my mother's," Thomas replied. Hidden under the floorboards, Running Elk's face showed an emotion Thomas couldn't quite name, something between reverence and fear. "That pendant has a story," he said finally, "one you should hear." But before he could continue, James Harris stumbled from the house, rifle in hand. "Get off my property," he slurred at Running Elk. "We don't need your kind here." "Father," Thomas said sharply, stepping between them. "He's here to trade, same as always." James's bloodshot eyes narrowed on the pendant. "Where'd you get that?" he demanded, echoing Running Elk's question, but with none of the elder's reverence. "It was Mother." James lurched forward, grabbing for the pendant, but Thomas stepped back, his reflexes quicker than his father's alcohol-dulled movements. "That belongs to them," James spat. "Part of her shame." "What shame?" Thomas asked, a quiet anger building in his voice. "What aren't you telling me?" James's laugh was hollow. "What aren't I telling you?" "What didn't she tell me?" "You mean, your mother had secrets enough for both of us?" Running Elk placed a cautioning hand on Thomas's shoulder. "This is not the time, young one." "Then when?" Thomas demanded. "I've waited my whole life for answers. About her, about me." His hand closed around the pendant. About why I dream of a man I've never met but somehow know. James's face drained of color. What man? An Apache warrior, Thomas said, watching his father's reaction closely. With an eagle feather in his hair. He's been riding toward me in my dreams for years now. James raised his rifle, pointing it not at Thomas but at Running Elk. You've been filling his head with your tribal superstitions. I have told him nothing. Running Elk replied calmly, that blood speaks for itself. Get out, James repeated. And if I see you talking to my son again, I won't be so forgiving. After Running Elk departed, Thomas confronted his father. What did he mean about the blood speaks? James took a long pull from his flask. Nothing. Indian nonsense. You're lying, Thomas said simply. You've always lied about Mother, about her connection to the tribe, about why I can speak their language without being taught, why I know things I shouldn't know. You want the truth? James's voice rose dangerous. Your mother was a whore who lay with savages before I found her. There's your precious truth. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Thomas stood perfectly still, only the muscle working in his jaw betraying his emotion. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her young face pale with shock. That's not true, she whispered. Mother wasn't like that. James turned away, shame briefly overtaking anger. Go inside, Sarah. But Sarah stood her ground, looking at her brother. I found something too, she said. In Mother's old sewing box. From her pocket she withdrew a folded piece of paper, the same one Elizabeth had tried to show James on her deathbed. The confession he had never read. Maybe now's the time, Sarah said, holding it out to Thomas, the pendant at his throat gleaming like a promise in the afternoon sun. The Apache reservation had changed in 7 years. Once proud warriors now lived in government-issued housing, their traditional dwellings replaced by structures that trapped summer heat and winter cold with equal efficiency. Children attended the mission school, where they were forbidden to speak their native tongue. Elders died, taking ancient knowledge with them to the grave. But on this day, a ripple of excitement spread through the community. A rider had been spotted approaching from the east, a lone figure on a paint horse, silhouetted against the rising sun. Running Elk, his hair now more gray than black, stood at the edge of the settlement. In his hands he held a ceremonial staff topped with eagle feathers and adorned with intricate beadwork. This staff had been passed down through generations of tribal leaders, carried only during times of great significance. Running Elk had retrieved it from its hiding place at dawn, guided by a dream that had awakened him with its clarity. The rider drew closer, his posture straight and proud despite the signs of a long journey. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked with new lines of experience, but unmistakable to those who had known him. A single eagle feather, its tip dipped in red ochre, was braided into his hair. Lone Wolf, Running Elk said, his voice carrying on the still morning air. The rider dismounted, his movements fluid despite the years. He stood before Running Elk, taller than most Apache men, his eyes holding the same intensity they had 17 summers ago. Brother, Lone Wolf greeted him, clasping Running Elk's forearm in the warrior's grip. A crowd gathered, murmurs of astonishment spreading as recognition dawned. Children stared openly at the stranger who was no stranger to their parents and grandparents. Some of the older tribe members made signs to ward off spirits, uncertain if the man before them was flesh or apparition. You have been gone many seasons, Running Elk said, offering the ceremonial staff. Lone Wolf accepted it with reverence. I have walked many paths, he replied, learned many truths, and now you return, as I said I would. Lone Wolf's gaze swept over the changed reservation. Where is Black Hawk? Running Elk's expression darkened. He leads a band of warriors who refuse the white man's boundaries. They raid settlements to the south. Lone Wolf nodded, unsurprised. And the Harris family? A hush fell over the gathering at the mention of the name. Running Elk studied his old friend carefully. The woman, Elizabeth, returned to the earth 5 summers ago. Something flickered in Lone Wolf's eyes, a brief shadow of pain quickly mastered. And the boy, Thomas, he is a man now, Running Elk said. He works his father's land. The old man drowns in the white man's fire water, while the son builds what the father neglects. Does he know? Running Elk hesitated. He wears the pendant, the one you gave Elizabeth when you made your blood oath. Lone Wolf's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where a thin scar marked the place he had cut himself 17 years ago, mixing his blood with Elizabeth's as they bound their fates together.
I saw him yesterday, Running Elk continued.
The blood speaks to him, though he does not understand its voice. He dreams of you. That evening, as the tribe gathered to formally welcome Lone Wolf's return, he sat with the elders around the council fire. The ceremonial staff stood planted in the earth beside him, its feathers stirring in the gentle breeze. He spoke of his journeys of time spent with tribes far to the north, of working as a guide for white explorers, of learning the ways of those who sought to destroy the Apache way of life. I did not run from my responsibilities, he told them. I ran toward understanding. To protect what matters most, I had to know our enemy. And what matters most? Asked Grey Cloud, now bent with age but still sharp of mind. Lone Wolf's gaze turned toward the distant lights of the settler community. Blood, he said simply. The future of our people. Later, alone with Running Elk, Lone Wolf revealed his true purpose. The time has come, he said. I made a promise to Elizabeth, sealed in blood. Thomas must know his heritage, his birthright. James Harris will not surrender him easily, Running Elk warned. He claims the boy as his own, though his treatment suggests otherwise. He is not James Harris's to surrender. Lone Wolf replied, his hand closing around the staff. Some claims run deeper than words spoken before a white man's god. As dawn broke the next morning, Lone Wolf stood on the ridge overlooking the Harris homestead. In the early light he could make out a tall figure, moving among the livestock, a young man whose every movement echoed memories Lone Wolf had carried for 17 years. My son, he whispered, the words carried away by the wind. Words spread through the settlement like wildfire. Lone Wolf had returned. For some of the older settlers, the name conjured memories of fear. For others, it was merely a legend told around evening fires. But for James Harris, it was a nightmare, resurrected. Lock the doors, he commanded Sarah, when the news reached them. The half-empty whiskey bottle on the table bore witness to how he'd spent the morning. Why? Sarah asked, her young face a mirror of her mother's when she was being stubborn. Thomas says the Apache have always been peaceful with us. James grabbed the bottle by its neck, his knuckles white. Don't argue with me, girl. From outside came the sound of Thomas returning from the fields. James lurched to his feet, moving to the door with surprising speed for a man so deep in his cups. He grabbed his shotgun from beside the door, a weapon that had seen little use beyond threatening imagined trespassers in recent years. Father, Thomas called, seeing James's silhouette in the doorway. What's wrong? Get inside, James ordered. Now, Thomas stood his ground, tall and solid as an oak. I heard in town that Lone Wolf has returned to the reservation. Is that what this is about? Inside, James roared. Once the door was barred behind them, James took another long pull from the bottle. The amber liquid caught the light streaming through the window, creating fractured patterns on the wall like shattered glass. He's come for you, James muttered, more to himself than to Thomas. What are you talking about? Thomas demanded. Why would an Apache warrior I've never met come for me? James laughed, a harsh, broken sound. Never met? You've been dreaming about him your whole damned life. Sarah stepped closer to Thomas, her eyes wide. The letter, she whispered, from Mother. What letter? James's head snapped up. Sarah reached into her apron pocket and withdrew the folded paper. I found it in Mother's sewing box. She tried to give it to you before she died. James lunged for it, but his movements were clumsy from drink. The bottle slipped from his grasp, shattering on the floor. Glass shards scattered across the planks, amber liquid pooling around them like blood. Give me that, he growled, cutting his hand on a glass shard as he tried to right himself. Thomas stepped between them. No, he said quietly, I think it's time for truth. He took the letter from Sarah and unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the faded handwriting. As he read, the color drained from his face. "Is this true?" he asked, looking up at James. James sank into a chair, suddenly seeming smaller, older. "What does it say?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "It says that my mother was captured by raiders when she was 16. Thomas recited, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. "That she was the only survivor of her family's wagon train. That the Apache found her and took her in." He paused, swallowing hard. "That she fell in love with a warrior named Lone Wolf, and I was born of that union." The silence that followed hung heavy, as a thundercloud. "You knew," Thomas said finally. "All these years, you knew I wasn't your son." James stared at the broken bottle, at the whiskey soaking into the floorboards. "I loved her," he said simply. "When I found her with the army rescue party, she was already carrying you. She begged me to claim you as my own, to take her away from the territory." "Why?" Sarah asked, her young voice cutting through the tension. "If she loved this lone wolf, why leave?" "The army was slaughtering any tribe that resisted relocation," James replied. "She thought you'd both be safer with me." He looked up at Thomas. "And you were. I gave you my name, my protection, your resentment," Thomas added quietly. James couldn't meet his eyes. "I tried. God knows I tried to love you like my own. But I reminded you of him." James nodded, his shoulders slumping. "Every day, you have his eyes, his way of moving. Even the way you sit a horse. It's him, not me." Thomas folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his shirt pocket near the pendant. "I need to meet him." "No." James surged to his feet, swaying slightly. "He'll take you away, fill your head with savage ideas." "He's my father," Thomas said, the words strange yet somehow right on his tongue. "I'm your father," James shouted, his hand closing around a large shard of the broken bottle. "I raised you, fed you, taught you everything you know." "You taught me to hate half of what I am," Thomas replied, his voice calm despite the storm building in his eyes. James raised the glass shard, whether in threat or emphasis unclear. "You're not leaving this house." "I'm not asking permission." Thomas turned toward the door. What happened next occurred in a blur of motion. James lunged forward, the glass shard glinting in the afternoon light. Sarah screamed. Thomas turned just as the makeshift weapon slashed toward him. Blood bloomed across Thomas's shirt, bright as the whiskey had been moments before. Blood soaked through Thomas's shirt, but the wound was shallow, a long slice across his ribs, rather than the deeper stab James's drunken aim had intended. Sarah's scream seemed to snap James from his rage. He stared at the bloodied glass in his hand, as if it belonged to someone else. "Thomas," he whispered, horror replacing anger. "I didn't mean." Thomas backed toward the door, one hand pressed to his side. "Stay away from me. Let me help you," James pleaded, reaching out. "Like you helped Mother." Thomas's voice was cold as winter rain, "drowning her secrets in your bottle until they drowned her too." Sarah moved to Thomas's side, her small hand slipping into his. "I'm coming with you." "No," both men said in unison. "She stays," Thomas continued, his eyes locked on James. "I don't trust you, but I trust your love for her. At least." He departed before James could respond, heading not for the settlement doctor, but toward the hills that separated their homestead from the reservation. His side burned with each step, but a deeper fire drove him forward. After years of half-truths and dreams he couldn't interpret, clarity beckoned like a signal fire. Halfway up the trail, Thomas stumbled, light-headed from blood loss. As he leaned against a boulder to catch his breath, a shadow detached itself from the trees ahead. "You're injured," said a voice, deep, measured, familiar though Thomas had never heard it before. Thomas straightened, instantly alert despite his wound. The man before him stood tall and straight, dressed in a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and elements adopted from white settlers. A single eagle feather, with a red-dipped tip, was braided into his hair. His face was weathered, lined with experience, but his eyes, Thomas recognized those eyes from his own reflection. Lone Wolf, Thomas said, the name feeling right in his mouth. The warrior nodded once. In his hands he held a small clay bowl filled with a pungent-smelling paste. Running Elk had a vision you would be wounded, he said simply. This will help. Thomas hesitated only briefly before lifting his bloodied shirt. The wound looked worse than it felt. A jagged line across his ribs that had mostly stopped bleeding. With practiced movements, Lone Wolf applied the medicine, his touch efficient but gentle. The white man did this, he asked. James, Thomas corrected. He's not himself lately. He fears losing what was never truly his. The words hung between them, acknowledgement of a truth both now understood. When Lone Wolf finished dressing the wound, he stepped back, his eyes taking in Thomas's full measure. You have her coloring, he observed, but you stand like an Apache. I had dreams, Thomas said abruptly, all my life, of you riding through the desert, looking back at me. A slight nod. The blood speaks across distance. My mother's letter said, I know what Elizabeth would have written. Lone Wolf interrupted. She was never one for lies, even when truth was dangerous. From a pouch at his waist, Lone Wolf withdrew a small object, wrapped in soft leather. He unwrapped it, carefully to reveal a carved wooden cradleboard charm. A miniature version of those Apache mothers attached to their babies' carriers for protection. It was worn smooth from handling, its original painted details faded to ghost-like impressions. This hung above your sleeping place when you were new to the world, Lone Wolf said, offering it to Thomas. Your mother carved it herself, learning our ways as if born to them. Thomas took the charm, small enough to fit in his palm. Memory stirred, not his own, but something carried in his blood. A woman singing softly, the scent of juniper smoke. Strong arms holding him secure. You made a blood oath, Thomas said, recalling the letter's contents. To protect you always, even from afar, Lone Wolf confirmed. To return when you were old enough to understand your heritage. Why did she leave? The question that had haunted Thomas since reading the letter. Lone Wolf's gaze turned distant. The army was hunting our people. A commander came to our camp, seeking any white captives. His jaw tight. She was not a captive, but they would not have believed that. And you, a mixed-blood child, would have been taken from both of us. So she chose to go with James. She chose your safety, Lone Wolf corrected. And I chose to let you both go, knowing the army would have killed me and taken you anyway. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where Thomas now knew a scar, matched the one Elizabeth had carried. But blood calls to blood, and promises made in blood must be honored. What promise? Thomas asked, though something in him already knew the answer. That when the time came, I would return for you, Lone Wolf said, that you would know both sides of your heritage, not just one, that the son of Lone Wolf would stand proud among his father's people. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the hills, not from the clear sky above, but from hoofbeats approaching. The settlement's sheriff and several armed men, with James Harris, riding among them. The approaching riders crested the hill, sunlight glinting off the sheriff's badge and the rifles several men carried. Lone Wolf's posture shifted subtly, not fear, but readiness. They will try to separate us, he said to Thomas. The white man's law does not recognize blood ties unless they are written on paper. He's over here, James shouted, pointing toward them. His voice carried the desperate edge of a man who had sobered just enough to realize what he might lose. Thomas straightened to his full height, ignoring the pull of his wound. I won't go back with him. Lone Wolf nodded once, then withdrew something from beneath his shirt, a small leather sheath containing an obsidian knife. The blade was ancient, its edge still razor-sharp, despite the years, its handle wrapped in faded sinew and adorned with beads that had lost their color to time. This blade has been passed through my family for 7 generations, Lone Wolf explained quickly. It has drawn the blood of enemies and brothers alike, sealed pacts and sundered them. He offered it to Thomas, handle first. Among our people, blood speaks louder than words or paper. If you accept your heritage, take it. Thomas hesitated only a moment before accepting the knife. It felt strangely familiar in his grip, as if his hand remembered what his mind could not. The riders were close now. Sheriff Davis, a fair but cautious man, raised his hand to halt the group several yards away. His eyes moved between Thomas, the blood on his shirt, and Lone Wolf. "Thomas," he called, "your father says you've been injured, that this man might have had something to do with it." "James Harris is not my father," Thomas replied clearly, "and he's the one who cut me." James dismounted unsteadily. "He's confused. That savage has poisoned his mind with lies." Sheriff Davis frowned. "Is that blood on your hands, James?" James looked down as if noticing the dried blood for the first time. "From trying to help him. He's my son, Davis. I have the right to take him home. I'm 17, Thomas countered. Old enough to choose my own path." The sheriff sighed. "Look, I don't want trouble. The army's already sending patrols through because of reports about renegade Apache. I don't need a custody dispute adding to it." "There is no dispute," Lone Wolf said, speaking directly to the sheriff. "The boy carries my blood. Ask Harris. He has always known this truth." All eyes turned to James, who seemed to deflate under their scrutiny. "Elizabeth was carrying him when I found her with the rescue party," he admitted finally. "But I raised him. That counts for something." "It does," Thomas agreed, his voice gentler, "but it doesn't change who I am, or my right to know my heritage." The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through thinning hair. "James, if the boy's of age and wasn't kidnapped, I have no grounds to intervene. This sounds like a family matter best sorted out privately." "He's all I have left of her," James said, his voice cracking. "You have Sarah," Thomas reminded him, "who needs a father, not a drunkard. And you will always have your memories of Elizabeth." Lone Wolf added, unexpectedly, "As will I. She chose you to protect our son when I could not. For that, you have my respect." Something passed between the two men, a recognition, perhaps, of what each had lost and found in Elizabeth Harris. The moment was broken by a rider, approaching from the direction of the settlement. He pulled up sharply, face grim. "Sheriff, there's army troops at the reservation. Captain Reeves says they're looking for a renegade Apache, says he's wanted for the murder of 2 soldiers years back." Lone Wolf's expression remained impassive, but Thomas felt him tense. "Is it true?" Thomas asked quietly. "They were not soldiers, but raiders who attacked a peaceful camp," Lone Wolf replied. "I protected our people. In their eyes, that made me a murderer." The sheriff looked between them, conflicted. "I should bring you in," he told Lone Wolf, "but something tells me there's more to this story than I know." "Davis," James interjected, "that Indian is trying to steal my son. Arrest him." The sheriff shook his head. "On what charge, James?" "Being a father, that's not against any law I enforce." He turned to Lone Wolf. "But I suggest you make yourself scarce until I can sort out what the army wants. They don't answer to local authority." Lone Wolf inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Thomas," he said, "the choice is yours. Return to the life you know, or come with me to learn the one that has been waiting for you." Thomas looked down at the obsidian knife in his hand, then at James, the man who had raised him, however, imperfectly. Finally he turned to Lone Wolf, seeing in the warrior's face echoes of his own features. "I need to say goodbye to Sarah," he said, "and there are things I must gather." "The army won't wait," the sheriff warned. "Then I'll meet you," Thomas told Lone Wolf. "Tonight at Singing Bird's grave." As the two groups parted, Thomas riding reluctantly with James and the sheriff back toward the homestead, Lone Wolf disappearing into the hills, the obsidian knife remained tucked in Thomas's belt, a weight both unfamiliar and strangely comforting against his hip. The ride back to the homestead passed in strained silence. Thomas kept his horse at a distance from James, the sheriff riding between them like a physical manifestation of the gulf that had opened. When they arrived, Sarah was waiting on the porch, her young face pinched with worry. "Thomas," she cried, running to him as he dismounted. Her eyes widened at the bloodstain on his shirt. "Are you hurt badly?" "I'll be fine." he assured her, casting a meaningful glance at James that silently communicated, "I won't tell her you did this." Inside, Thomas moved with purpose, gathering only what couldn't be replaced. His mother's journal, the carved eagle from Singing Bird, the cradleboard charm. As he packed these treasures into a small leather satchel, Sarah watched from the doorway. "You're leaving," she said. "Not a question." "Yes, with him? The Apache warrior?" Thomas paused. "He's my father, Sarah. My blood father." She nodded, digesting this. "I found something else," she said, after a moment. "After you left." From her pocket, she pulled a small object wrapped in faded calico. Thomas unwrapped it to reveal a pair of intricately woven baby moccasins, so small they fit in his palm. The leather was soft with age, the beadwork detailed with symbols he somehow recognized: protection, strength, journey. These were not settler craftsmanship, but distinctly Apache in design. "Where did you find these?" he asked, his voice hushed. "Hidden in Mother's old trunk, beneath a false bottom." Sarah's eyes were solemn beyond her years. There was a note with them. It said, "For my son's first steps in two worlds." Thomas ran his finger over the beadwork, a lump forming in his throat. "She knew even then. She wanted you to have both," Sarah said. "Not to choose." Outside, the sheriff's voice carried through the open window. "James, I understand your feelings, but the boy has a right to know his heritage." "He has a heritage," James replied bitterly. "Right here. Everything I built was for him." Thomas tucked the moccasins carefully into his satchel, then turned to Sarah. "I need you to understand something," he said, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "I'm not leaving you. I'm finding the part of me that's been missing. Will you come back?" "Yes," he promised. "And perhaps someday you can come with me, see the beauty of the Apache ways as Mother did." Sarah's small hand touched the pendant at his throat. "Two rivers, one sea," she read. "That's us, isn't it? Different beginnings, same family." Thomas hugged her tightly, marveling at her wisdom. When he released her, he reached for the obsidian knife at his belt and pressed it into her hands. "Keep this safe for me," he said. "It belongs to our family, both sides of it." She nodded solemnly, hiding the knife in her skirts as James entered. The man who had raised Thomas stood framed in the doorway, looking older than his years. The anger had drained from him, leaving only a hollow resignation. "You've made your choice," he said flatly. "Not between you and him," Thomas corrected. "Between truth and lies, between wholeness and half a life." James's gaze dropped to the satchel. "Taking her thing, only what connects to my Apache heritage. The rest," Thomas gestured to the cabin, "the land beyond. This is your legacy to me. I'm not abandoning it, but you're leaving, to learn, not to vanish." Thomas straightened. "You taught me to work this land, to build, to survive. Those lessons matter, but there are others I need now." For a moment, something like pride flickered across James's face. "You sound like her," he said quietly, "always seeing both sides." As dusk settled over the homestead, Thomas stood at his mother's grave. He placed a hand on the simple wooden marker, feeling a connection that transcended death. "I understand now," he whispered, "why you kept secrets, why you made the choices you did." From the shadows beyond the grave plot, a figure emerged, Lone Wolf, moving as silently as his namesake. "Are you ready?" he asked. Thomas shouldered his satchel. Inside it, the baby moccasins that represented his first steps in the Apache world. Steps delayed but not denied. "Sarah knows I'll return," he said. "And James, he needs time." Lone Wolf nodded. "The white man's heart is wounded, but not beyond healing. Time may build a bridge where now there is only broken ground." As they walked away from the homestead, Thomas looked back once at the lights of the cabin where Sarah stood watching. In that moment he felt both the weight of leaving and the lightness of finally moving toward wholeness. "Where do we go?" he asked. "Not to the reservation," Lone Wolf replied. "The army searches there. First I must show you a place sacred to our family, a place where your mother and I made our blood oath." Under the rising moon, father and son moved through the landscape like shadows, two rivers merging into one. Captain William Reeves unfolded the worn map on the rough wooden table of the reservation's administrative office. Lamplight cast his shadow large against the wall as he traced a finger along the marked territories. "Cliddens, the renegade was spotted here," he told the lieutenant standing at attention beside him. "According to our informant, he's been living with northern tribes for years, but returned recently." "What's our interest in one Apache, sir?" the younger officer asked. "Especially after so long." His mouth tightened. "Lone Wolf isn't just any Apache. 17 years ago, he led an ambush that killed 2 of our scouts. But more importantly, he knows this territory better than anyone. Every cave, every water source, every hidden pass." He tapped the map emphatically. "If the hostiles to the south are planning larger raids, he'd be invaluable to them. And you believe he's returned for a specific purpose?" "Though I know it." Reeves withdrew an official-looking document from his breast pocket, a military order bearing the territorial governor's seal. "We have authorization to relocate all Apache in this region to the San Carlos Reservation. No exceptions. The local tribe has been peaceful for years," the lieutenant observed. "The settlers even trade with them." "Orders are orders," Reeves said curtly, refolding the document. "And this relocation solves 2 problems. It removes potential allies for the hostiles and puts this land in the hands of people who'll actually use it properly." The document's seal gleamed in the lamplight, the embossed eagle spreading its wings above flowing script that authorized the removal of all native persons from lands designated for settlement and productive use. The scout mentioned there might be some connection between the renegade and that family. Reeves's expression darkened. "James Harris has been in these parts almost 20 years. Respectable man, despite his recent difficulties." "I knew his wife slightly. Unusual woman, but civilized enough. And their son?" A pause. "What about him?" The scout said, "There are rumors about the boy's parentage." Reeves straightened, his hand coming to rest on his sidearm. "Gossip and superstition. I won't have it in my command." He folded the map with decisive movements. "Prepare the men. We move at first light." As the lieutenant departed, Reeves remained, staring at the relocation order. His mind traveled back 17 years to a young woman with knowing eyes who had refused to speak of her time among the Apache. He had suspected even then, but some truths were better left buried, especially those that complicated the clean division between civilization and savagery his orders required. Dawn found a different scene unfolding at the Harris homestead. Sheriff Davis arrived to find James sitting on the porch, a cold cup of coffee in his hands, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Thomas didn't come home last night," James said without preamble. The sheriff sighed. "Can't say I'm surprised, given yesterday's revelations. I need your help finding him." "James," the boy made his choice. "He's of age." James's hands tightened around the cup. "It's not that simple. The army's looking for Lone Wolf. If Thomas is with him, they'll assume he's chosen his side." The sheriff finished grimly. Inside, Sarah listened from behind the partly open door. When the men moved their conversation to the sheriff's office in town, she slipped away to the small cemetery where her mother and singing bird were buried. There, half hidden by morning mist, she found fresh tracks, one set belonging to her brother, the other to a man who walked with the distinctive stride of someone used to moving silently. She followed the tracks to the edge of the property before they disappeared into the rocky terrain beyond. Returning to the house, she went to her hiding place beneath a loose floorboard in her room. There, wrapped in a scrap of calico, lay the obsidian knife Thomas had entrusted to her. Beside it now she placed something else, a folded paper she had taken from James's coat while he slept. Carefully unfolding it, she studied the official order once more. The army's seal and the governor's signature made it intimidating, but she could read well enough to understand its meaning. All Apache were to be removed from their lands within the month, by force if necessary. Sarah traced the words with a small finger, understanding blooming within her. This wasn't just about Lone Wolf's past crimes, it was about the future of the entire tribe. Her brother had walked into danger far greater than a personal dispute between two fathers. With decision beyond her years, she refolded the paper and slipped it into her pocket alongside the knife. She would need help to warn Thomas, and there was only one person in the settlement who might know where he and Lone Wolf had gone. Running Elk had always been kind to her on the rare occasions she accompanied her mother to trade with the tribe. He would understand the urgency of her mission. As she slipped out the back door, the morning sun caught the governor's seal on the paper in her pocket, its golden light a stark contrast to the dark purpose it contained. Dawn painted the sacred canyon in hues of amber and gold. Thomas followed Lone Wolf along a narrow path that seemed to disappear into solid rock, only to reveal itself at the last moment as a hidden passage. They emerged onto a ledge overlooking a small valley, invisible from the surrounding plain. "The people have kept this place secret for generations," Lone Wolf explained. "Even the army scouts do not know of it." Below them a clear spring bubbled from rock, feeding a small creek lined with cottonwoods. Near the water stood several traditional wickiups, domed shelters of brush and branches, and the remains of cook fires. A handful of Apache families moved about the encampment, women grinding corn, men preparing weapons, children tending small gardens in protected alcoves. "Those who refused reservation life," Lone Wolf said, "or who the white man's diseases would have killed in crowded conditions. Here they maintain the old ways." Thomas absorbed the scene, feeling a strange sense of recognition. "You brought me and my mother here?" "Yes. You took your first steps on that ground." Lone Wolf pointed to a flat area near the spring. "Elizabeth learned our ways here, in the seasons before you were born." As they descended to the valley floor, an elderly woman approached. Despite her age, she moved with dignity, her face a map of lines that spoke of both hardship and joy. In her hands, she carried a weathered leather-bound book. "Rising Sun," Lone Wolf greeted her, with respect. "This is my son." The woman studied Thomas with bright, knowing eyes. "I see Elizabeth in his face," she said in Apache, then switched to perfect English, "and in his eyes I see his father's spirit." Thomas was startled by her command of English. She smiled at his surprise. "I was educated at the mission school before I rejected their ways," she explained. "Knowledge is a weapon that cuts both ways, young one." She offered him the book she carried. "Your mother left this in my keeping, should you ever find your way here." Thomas accepted it with reverence. The cover was worn smooth by handling, its pages yellowed with age. Opening it, he found not the expected writing, but detailed drawings, intricate maps of the surrounding territories, marked with symbols indicating water sources, caves, hidden passes, and ancient burial grounds. "A tribal archive," Rising Sun explained. "Your mother helped create it, combining her settlers' knowledge of map-making with our oral traditions. It shows not just the land as it appears, but as it truly is, the sacred places, the secret ways, the grounds where our ancestors rest." Thomas turned the pages carefully, recognizing his mother's artistic hand in some drawings, other styles indicating multiple contributors over generations. "Why would she help create this?" he asked. "Because she understood what was coming," Rising Sun replied. "The white man's hunger for land never abates. She knew our people would need every advantage to survive." Lone Wolf's hand came to rest on Thomas's shoulder. "Elizabeth was caught between worlds as you are. She chose to protect both." Later, as Thomas studied the book by firelight, Lone Wolf explained their situation. "The army searches for me, but their true purpose is larger. For years they have wanted these lands cleared of Apache." "How do you know this?" "I have friends, among other tribes, among Mexican villages, even among some settlers. They bring word of government plans." Thomas's finger traced a path on one of the maps. "This shows routes to Mexico." Lone Wolf nodded. Some of our people have already gone south. Others refuse to leave ancestral lands. What will you do? What I have always done, protect our people. Lone Wolf's gaze was steady. But now I must also protect my son, as I promised Elizabeth. Thomas closed the book, weighing his next words carefully. My whole life I've had dreams I couldn't explain, knowledge I shouldn't possess. Now I understand why. He looked up at his father. I want to learn everything, our language, our ways, our history. Pride flickered in Lone Wolf's eyes. And so you shall. Their conversation was interrupted by a sentry's low whistle. A moment later, a young Apache warrior Thomas recognized from the reservation approached. Breathing hard from running. Running elk sends warning, he reported. The army moves at dawn to enforce a relocation order. All Apache are to be removed to San Carlos. San Carlos is death for many of our elders and children. Rising Sun said, joining them. The diseases, the poor water. There is more, the messenger continued. The Harris girl came to the reservation seeking Thomas. She brings news that Captain Reeves has taken special interest in your return, Lone Wolf, and in your son. Thomas tensed. Sarah, is she safe? Running Elk keeps her hidden from the soldiers, but she brings this. The messenger handed Thomas a folded paper. Unfolding it revealed the governor's seal and official language authorizing the removal of all native persons from the territory. They've wanted this land for years, Lone Wolf said grimly. My return merely gives them the excuse they needed. Thomas stared at the order, realizing the personal and the political had become inseparable. His journey to discover his heritage had landed him in the middle of a much larger conflict, one where the future of an entire people hung in the balance. What can we do? He asked. Lone Wolf's gaze moved to the book of maps in Thomas's hands. Knowledge is power, he said, and your mother left us more than just maps. The emergency council gathered in the largest wickiup as night fell. Elders sat in a circle around the central fire, their faces solemn in the flickering light. Thomas and Lone Wolf joined them, with Rising Sun translating the Apache discussions for Thomas's benefit, though he understood more than anyone expected. At the center of the circle lay a beautifully crafted peace pipe, its long stem adorned with eagle feathers, its bowl carved from red pipestone. This was no ordinary pipe, but a sacred object, used only in the most significant tribal deliberations. We face a choice that will determine our people's future, Running Elk began, having arrived from the reservation with Sarah hidden among his family. The army brings force we cannot match. Black Hawk, now a fierce warrior in his prime, spoke next. We should fight. Better to die on our lands than waste away at San Carlos. Murmurs of both agreement and concern rippled through the gathering. Rising Sun lifted the peace pipe. Before words become heated, let us remember our traditions. This pipe has witnessed the decisions of our ancestors for generations. When it passes, speak only truth and wisdom. She packed the bowl with a mixture of tobacco and sacred herbs, lit it with a twig from the fire, and took the first ceremonial puff before passing it to the eldest man present. The pipe made its way around the circle, each person taking a ritual smoke before speaking their mind. When it reached Thomas, he hesitated, aware of the significance. Lone Wolf nodded encouragement. Thomas accepted the pipe, the weight of it surprising him as he drew in the smoke. A sense of connection flooded through him to the people around him, to the land beneath him, to generations past and future. I stand between two worlds, Thomas said when it was his turn to speak. Born of both, belonging fully to neither. But tonight I see that the division between our peoples serves only those who would take from both. He placed Elizabeth's book of maps before the council. My mother understood this. She preserved your knowledge while adding her own. Perhaps that is what we must all do now. Find a new path that honors the old ways while facing new challenges. The council debated long into the night. Some advocated immediate departure for Mexico, others for armed resistance, still others for negotiation. Sarah, permitted to join because of her crucial warning, listened wide-eyed to the proceedings, occasionally whispering questions to Running Elk's granddaughter. Near midnight, an unexpected visitor arrived. Sheriff Davis, alone and not here officially, he explained as warriors regarded him warily. But you should know Captain Reeves has received reinforcements. They plan to move at dawn, with or without my cooperation. Why warn us? Blackhawk demanded, suspicious. Davis removed his hat, revealing a lined face troubled by conscience. Because I've enforced the law in these parts for 15 years, based on a simple principle: justice should be blind to the color of a man's skin. This relocation isn't justice, it's theft, disguised as policy. He turned to Thomas. Your father, James, is looking for you. He's worried sick about both you and Sarah. Is he with the army? Thomas asked. No, he's refusing to cooperate with Reeves, actually. Says he won't help hunt down his son. Wait, Thomas hadn't realized he was carrying lightened slightly at these words. As the council resumed its deliberations, Lone Wolf and Thomas stepped outside to speak privately. There is something you should know, Lone Wolf said. Something I have not told the others. From inside his shirt he withdrew a folded paper, fragile with age. This was given to me by a dying army clerk years ago, a man who found his conscience too heavy to bear. Thomas unfolded it carefully to reveal a land deed with official government seals and signatures. It formally recognized the Apache tribe's right to their traditional territories, signed by a territorial governor from 20 years earlier. A treaty, Thomas asked, scanning the legal language. One the government chose to forget, Lone Wolf confirmed. The clerk kept the only copy when his superiors ordered all records destroyed. Thomas stared at the document, understanding dawning. This could stop the relocation. It's legal proof of the tribe's right to remain. Perhaps, if those in power choose to honor it, we need to get this to someone who can enforce it, Thomas said, mind racing. Not Captain Reeves, but someone above him. Lone Wolf's expression was skeptical. The white man's laws change like the wind when gold or land is at stake. Thomas carefully refolded the document. Not all white men ignore justice. Sheriff Davis came to warn us at great personal risk, and your other father refused to help the army find you, Lone Wolf acknowledged. Perhaps there are allies where we least expect them. When they returned to the council, a plan was taking shape, one that would require cooperation, not just among the Apache but with sympathetic settlers as well. It would also require Thomas to bridge the worlds of his birth as he never had before. The peace pipe made its final round as dawn approached, and the council reached its decision. When it came to Lone Wolf, he drew deeply, then spoke the words that would set their course. We will not run, nor will we fight a battle we cannot win. Instead, we will use the white man's own laws and words against him. My son will lead this effort, for he walks in both worlds. All eyes turned to Thomas, the weight of their hopes settling on his shoulders as surely as the pipe had settled in his hand. Dawn was breaking as Thomas and Sarah rode toward the Harris homestead, Sheriff Davis accompanying them, while Lone Wolf and the tribal council implemented their part of the hastily formed plan. The old land deed was secured in a leather pouch inside Thomas's shirt, its weight slight but its importance immeasurable. James won't be happy to see me, Davis warned as they approached. Not after I let you go yesterday. He'll listen, Thomas replied, though uncertainty edged his voice. The homestead came into view, morning light painting the modest buildings in shades of gold. But as they drew closer, Thomas tensed. Something was wrong. The door to the cabin stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Father, he called, dismounting quickly. Inside, chairs were overturned, a table broken. Signs of struggle marked the usually tidy space. Thomas's heart raced as he moved through the rooms. Father, James? A weak cough drew them to the bedroom. James Harris lay on the floor beside his bed, blood matting his hair, his face bruised and swollen. Thomas, he managed, his voice barely audible. They took it. Thomas knelt beside him, gently helping him onto the bed while Sarah fetched water. Who? What did they take? James's trembling hand pointed to a loose floorboard beneath the bed. Your mother's evidence. Sheriff Davis helped Thomas pry up the board, revealing an empty space beneath. Whatever had been hidden there was gone, Captain Reeves, James whispered, came last night, looking for you. When I wouldn't tell him where you'd gone, his voice trailed off in a fit of coughing. Thomas exchanged a glance with Davis. What evidence, Father? James's breathing was labored, each word an effort. Elizabeth kept records of everything. With shaking hands, he reached beneath his pillow and withdrew a small brass key on a leather cord. The lockbox, in the root cellar, hidden behind the north wall. Thomas recognized the key immediately. His mother had worn it around her neck for as long as he could remember, though he'd never known its purpose. Sarah helped James drink, while Thomas and Davis hurried to the root cellar. The lockbox was exactly where James had described, concealed behind a false section of the cellar wall, made of sturdy metal with a heavy brass lock. It had survived the years in the cool, dry space unharmed. Thomas inserted the key with reverence, feeling as though he was about to unlock more than just a box. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, different from Elizabeth's herb book or the tribal maps. This one was filled with her neat handwriting, dates and observations carefully recorded, but more importantly, beneath it lay several official-looking documents with government seals. These are military reports, Davis said, examining one carefully. Correspondence between Captain Reeves and his superiors from 17 years ago. Thomas scanned the pages, his expression hardening. She was collecting evidence. About Reeves, the documents told a damning story. Reeves had led unauthorized raids against peaceful Apache camps, falsified reports of hostilities to justify military action, and personally profited from land cleared of native inhabitants. One report detailed the specific incident that had forced Lone Wolf to flee, not an ambush led by the Apache as Reeves claimed, but a peaceful meeting turned deadly when Reeves ordered his men to fire without provocation. She was building a case, Thomas realized. All those years she was gathering proof of his crimes. Davis shook his head in amazement. Your mother was a remarkable woman, and now Reeves has whatever else she collected, Thomas said grimly. They returned to the house, where James had rallied slightly with Sarah's care, his eyes fixed on the lockbox in Thomas's hands. You found it, he whispered. Thomas sat beside him. Why didn't you use this evidence before? It could have cleared Lone Wolf's name years ago. Shame crossed James's battered face. I didn't know about it until after she died. Found the key but never the box. His hand closed weakly around Thomas's wrist. Was too angry. At her, at him, at you, though you deserved none of it. And now, Thomas asked softly, now I see what she always saw. James's gaze moved to the window, toward the distant hills where the Apache made their home. That justice doesn't follow bloodlines or skin color. It follows truth. With effort, he pulled himself to sitting position. Help me up. If we're going to stop Reeves, I need to be on my feet. You're in no condition, Davis began. I've spent 17 years hiding from the truth. James interrupted. I won't waste another minute. His eyes met Thomas's. A lifetime of unspoken regrets and hopes passing between them. Your mother fought for both your world. The least I can do is follow her example. Thomas helped him stand, supporting his weight. We need to get to the territorial judge in Fort Benson before Reeves can destroy this evidence. It's a day's hard ride. Then we'd better start now, James said, straightening, despite his pain. As they prepared to leave, Sarah retrieved something from her room. The obsidian knife Thomas had entrusted to her. You might need this, she said, returning it to her brother, to finish what Mother started. Thomas accepted it solemnly, the blade catching the morning light as they stepped outside to face whatever lay ahead. Fort Benson rose from the plains like a man-made mesa, its wooden walls and watchtowers imposing against the endless sky. Thomas, James, and Sheriff Davis approached cautiously, having left Sarah safely hidden with Running Elk's family. The journey had taken a toll on James, his face gray with pain, but determination kept him upright in the saddle. Judge Crawford holds court until sundown, Davis informed them. If we can get these documents to him before Reeves realizes what we're doing, Reeves will have men watching the main entrance, James warned, his voice strained. He has too many friends here. Thomas studied the fort's layout, his eyes tracking the movement of soldiers along the walls. "There's another way in," he said with quiet certainty. "How would you know that?" Davis asked. Thomas touched the tribal map he carried, memorized during the night. "My mother's knowledge. The Apache helped build this fort 20 years ago. Forced labor. They created a hidden entrance for emergencies. He led them to a dry creek bed that ran near the fort's eastern wall. Dismounting, he counted paces from a distinctive boulder, then knelt to brush away decades of accumulated sand and debris. His fingers found the edge of a trap door, weathered but intact. "This leads to storage cellars beneath the fort," he explained. "From there we can reach the administrative building without crossing the parade ground." James looked at his son with new respect. "Your mother never mentioned this." "She kept many secrets," Thomas replied. "For everyone's protection, the passage was narrow and low, forcing them to crouch as they made their way through cool darkness." James struggled, each movement clearly causing pain, but he refused assistance. Eventually, they emerged into a dimly lit storage room stacked with crates and barrels. Thomas led them through a maze of corridors, encountering no one until they reached a hallway lined with offices. Outside one door, emblazoned with Territorial Judge Crawford, stood a young soldier on guard duty. Sheriff Davis stepped forward. "Private, I need to see the judge on urgent county business." The soldier straightened. "Sir, the judge left an hour ago. Captain Reeves requested his presence at the reservation for the relocation proceedings." Thomas and James exchanged alarmed glances. "When did this happen?" Davis demanded. "Captain arrived at dawn with new orders." The soldier replied. "Said there was resistance expected, and the judge's authority would be needed on site." "We're too late," James whispered. "Not yet," Thomas countered. He turned to the soldier. "We need the fastest horses in the fort." "I can't authorize," Sheriff Davis cut him off. "Son, I'm the law in Parker County, and I'm telling you this is a matter of life and death." The young man hesitated, then nodded. "The courier horses are in the first stable, fresh and ready to ride." They moved quickly, James visibly faltering as they reached the stables. "Go without me," he urged. "I'll only slow you down." "No," Thomas said firmly. "We do this together." As Thomas helped James mount, his hand brushed against something hard in his father's coat. "What's that?" James withdrew a silver pocket watch, its case dented and tarnished. "It was going to be yours someday," he said, offering it to Thomas. "It belonged to my father and his father before him." Thomas accepted it, opening the case to reveal the watch face, still ticking after all these years. Inside the lid, an inscription read, "Time reveals all truths." "It seems appropriate now," James said with a weak smile. Thomas nodded, securing the watch in his pocket before mounting his own horse. They rode hard, taking a direct route to the reservation that cut across open country. As they crested a rise overlooking the Apache settlement, they pulled up sharply. Army wagons surrounded the main area. Soldiers were already herding people into groups, separating families, confiscating personal items. Judge Crawford stood on a makeshift platform beside Captain Reeves, reading from official documents as bewildered and angry tribal members were processed for relocation. "Where's Lone Wolf?" Thomas murmured, scanning the chaotic scene. "There," Davis pointed to a small knot of soldiers surrounding a single figure, Lone Wolf, his hands bound, standing ready despite his captivity. Reeves noticed their arrival, his face darkening as he recognized Thomas and James. He barked orders to nearby soldiers, who immediately moved to intercept them. "We need to get to the judge," Thomas said. "Show him the evidence before Reeves can stop us." "I'll create a distraction," Davis offered. "You two get to Crawford." As Davis rode toward one side of the encampment drawing soldiers away, Thomas and James urged their horses forward. They had almost reached the platform when a shot rang out. James jerked in his saddle, blood blossoming on his shoulder. "Father!" Thomas cried, reaching to steady him. Through the chaos, Thomas locked eyes with Lone Wolf. A moment of silent communication passed between them, a plan formed in the crucible of crisis. Thomas withdrew the old land deed from inside his shirt with one hand and Elizabeth's evidence with the other, holding them high above his head. "Judge Crawford," he shouted, "I have evidence of fraud and murder committed by Captain Reeves, and legal proof that this relocation is unlawful." The judge turned, squinting against the sun at the documents Thomas held aloft. Reeves's face contorted with rage as he reached for his sidearm. Two fathers, one son, the truth suspended between them as surely as the pocket watch now ticking in Thomas's pocket, counting down the moments to justice or disaster. Time seemed to slow as Reeves drew his pistol. Thomas saw every detail with preternatural clarity. The judge's startled expression, James slumping in his saddle, Lone Wolf tensing against his bonds. In that suspended moment, Thomas made his choice. He launched himself from his horse directly at Reeves, documents clutched in one hand, the obsidian knife in the other. They collided hard, tumbling from the platform. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the air before spinning away. Thomas landed atop Reeves, the knife at the captain's throat. "It's over," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Judge Crawford found his voice. "Stand down. Everyone stand down." His authority cut through the confusion, freezing soldiers with weapons half raised. Sheriff Davis was already beside James, supporting him as he dismounted. "The judge needs to see this," James insisted, gesturing to the documents Thomas had dropped in the struggle. Crawford collected the papers, adjusting his spectacles as he scanned their contents. His expression grew increasingly grave. "These are serious allegations, Captain Reeves," he said finally. "Military reports with your signature authorizing unauthorized raids, falsified accounts of Apache hostilities." He held up the land deed. "And this appears to be a legally binding agreement, granting this land to the Apache tribe in perpetuity." "Forgeries," Reeves spat from beneath Thomas. "Created by renegades and sympathizers. The territorial governor's seal cannot be forged." Crawford replied, examining it closely, "And these military documents bear the official letterhead of Fort Benson." Thomas released Reeves but kept the knife ready. "My mother collected evidence for years. Elizabeth Harris, the woman you knew as a former captive of the Apache, she knew what you'd done, and she was building a case against you." Recognition and fury crossed Reeves's face. That woman was nothing but an Indian lover. She betrayed her own kind. She believed in justice, Thomas countered. "For all people." Judge Crawford signaled to his clerk, "Take Captain Reeves into custody pending a formal investigation. These documents warrant immediate action." As soldiers moved to restrain their former commander, Reeves lunged suddenly, pulling a hidden derringer from his boot. "The savage dies first," he shouted, aiming at Lone Wolf. Thomas reacted without thinking, throwing himself between the gun and his birth father. The shot cracked across the reservation, but it was Reeves who fell, Sheriff Davis's bullet finding its mark before the captain could fire again. In the silence that followed, Thomas cut Lone Wolf's bonds. Their eyes met in wordless communication before Thomas turned to James, who was being tended by an army surgeon. "How bad is it?" Thomas asked. "He'll live," the surgeon replied. "Clean through the shoulder." James reached up with his good arm, clasping Thomas's hand. "You saved them," he said weakly. "Both your fathers." Judge Crawford approached, the documents organized in his hands. "This land deed is authentic," he announced, "and these military reports are damning. The relocation order is hereby suspended, pending a full review." Relief swept through the gathered Apache. Running Elk stepped forward. "Our people have suffered much under false accusations. Will the truth finally be heard?" "It will," Crawford assured him. "These documents will be presented to the territorial governor immediately." As the tension of the day subsided into cautious hope, a group of Apache elders approached Thomas, led by Rising Sun. In her hands, she carried something wrapped in a blanket of the finest weaving, geometric patterns telling a story only the initiated could read. "The council has met," she announced, "and we are in agreement." She unwrapped the blanket to reveal a magnificent eagle feather headdress, its white and brown feathers arranged in the traditional style reserved for tribal leaders. "This belonged to your grandfather," Lone Wolf explained, pride evident in his voice, "and his father before him. It passes now to you, not because you share their blood, but because you have earned it through your actions." Thomas knelt as Rising Sun placed the headdress upon his head. The weight of it, physical and symbolic, settled on him like a mantle of responsibility. "I am of two worlds," Thomas said, rising to address both the Apache and the settlers who had gathered, "as are many of us, in ways we may not recognize. Today we begin to acknowledge that our strength lies not in separation, but in the wisdom each tradition brings." Later, as sunset painted the sky in hues of amber and gold, Thomas stood between his two fathers, James resting against a wagon, Lone Wolf standing tall beside him. Sarah joined them, slipping her small hand into Thomas's. "What happens now?" she asked. Thomas touched the headdress, then the pocket watch that rested against his heart. "Now we build something new from the best of both worlds." In the distance, Apache children played alongside settler children, who had come with their parents to witness the day's events. Among them, a small boy with dark hair and light eyes looked up at Thomas with innocent curiosity. The next generation, already bridging worlds. "That boy will call you teacher soon," Lone Wolf observed with quiet certainty. Thomas smiled, recognizing the echo of the words spoken 17 summers ago. But unlike then, these words promised not separation but connection, not secrets but understanding, not conflict but peace. The sun slipped below the horizon, ending one day and promising another. Just as Elizabeth had envisioned when she carved those baby moccasins long ago, her son now stood firmly in two worlds, not torn between them but strengthened by both, ready to lead others along the path she had begun.